We're dumping cortisol, adrenaline into our bodies unnecessarily. And at some point, for all of us, whatever the weakest link in our body is going to break down. For me, it was the pancreas.
Hello, my friends. If you have found yourself stressed out and overwhelmed, and if you've noticed that this is taking a toll on your health and your happiness, then this is the episode for you. Because who we're speaking with today is Professor Pete Alexander. He's an entrepreneur, best-selling author, a speaker, and a podcast host. But what he does most expertly is he teaches us how to deal with stress and has an incredible personal story of why it is so important to put the priority on your own health. And that if you don't take your health seriously, and if you trade your health for success, that you will be sorely mistaken. And this is a fascinating interview because in this episode, Professor Pete Alexander shares with us his story of how stress and overwhelm and achievement and that constant striving for doing better, greater and greater success really cost him significantly in terms of his health. And there was this aha moment for him. And now really his passion has been how to help other people to de-stress and how to take good accountability of their own health. Join me now in this interview. I know you're going to love it. Let me know what you think. Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy. And yes, so welcome to Professor Pete Alexander here. We're so happy to have you with us today. Thank you for joining me.
Well, Tarryn, thank you so much for having me on your show, and I really appreciate the time of your listeners as well.
Fabulous. Well, I think in order to kick off this conversation properly, please share with us, what do you do? Who do you serve? And how do you do it? So give us the DL. What do you do, Pete?
Sure. Okay. So people ask me that all the time, and I'm a multitude of different things. I run a interior landscaping business in the San Francisco Bay Area, the fourth largest one, which I'm very grateful for. It's grown over the years. I also am a podcast host of the Winning at Business and Life podcast, as we've talked about before. And the other thing I do is I help people with their stress. And, we all have stress. And the situation happens where we tend to think, oh, we can't do anything about it, or we don't have any time for this. And what I have experienced firsthand and what I've seen from others that I've worked with, yes, you can. And it doesn't take a lot of time. You just got to get started. And so I try and make a difference in this world by helping other people to handle challenging situations with grace and be able to be a better person for it.
Awesome. That is so cool. I mean, that's exactly the reason why I was so eager to have you come on to this podcast, because this is something that busy, high achieving business owners and leaders of their worlds and their families and of their dreams are so familiar with, is stress, something we
Mhm.
all have in common. So what is your story? How did you come to understand stress? And I'm guessing there's a personal story in there somewhere where once upon a time you understood stress before you understood how to overcome it. Please share that with us.
Yeah, actually, if we go once upon a time, Stress and I have had a lifetime relationship with each other. It started when I was a small kid. I grew up in an extremely dysfunctional family.
Mm.
So I had to be the adult before I was even a teenager.
Mm.
So I didn't realize what kind of stress was going on inside of me because you just deal with it.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I got into my 40s where all of a sudden the stress started taking its toll over time. And what happened was it was in 2008, and it was a perfect storm of stressful activity. So my dad was dying and he needed his affairs to be taken care of. My mom had major hip surgery and didn't have enough insurance to have proper care, so she needed help. My kids were very small at this time and wanted my attention. I was running the landscaping business, which, was taking up 60 hours a week of my time. And oh, by the way, my marriage was heading for a divorce.
Mm.
So, needless to say, all those things on my shoulders culminated in my diagnosis with stress-induced diabetes. The crazy thing is two things. One, there's no record of diabetes in my family tree other than one cousin. So there's none. There's none. And two, I didn't listen to my body about what stress was doing to it. Instead, what happened was I continued, like so many of us entrepreneurs do, burning the candle at both ends for another 10 years until I ended up in the emergency room with a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for your listeners who may not know what that is, my body was eating itself alive because of my stress. And the doctors said that I was 1 hour from being comatose. That is how crazy it is. And the worst part is I ended up from the emergency room, they transferred into ICU, which I'd never been in ICU before. I'd been in the emergency room for sports related injuries or kids had injuries, never been in ICU. And on my second day in ICU, I get this text. I had gone back to the corporate world, and I was working for a medical device company. And my boss at the time knew that I was in the hospital. And I get this text at about 6 a.m. And I wasn't sleeping because the nurses and the staff were checking my blood every hour. So, you don't get much sleep. And I get this text at about 6 a.m. and my boss says, "You have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it?" And I kid you not, Tarryn, I pick up my phone and I start, trying to reschedule this because
Problem
what a
solving.
surprise. Yeah, exactly. Because what a surprise. I didn't have my work laptop with me in the ICU. And when I was admitted to the hospital, my glucose numbers as a diabetic were so high that the medical grade glucometers could not read them. They estimated that my numbers were 8 to 10 times over what they should have been because I went through 6 liters of fluid. I was so dehydrated, 6 liters of fluid, and I never had to urinate.
Yeah.
So my numbers finally had come down into more reasonable numbers. They were still high, but they had come down into more reasonable numbers. And as I'm sitting there trying to reschedule this webinar, the nurse at that time, she checks my blood and she sees that all of a sudden, like a 90-degree angle, it skyrockets back up. And she says, a matter of factly to me, complete stranger, matter of factly, she says, "You realize that's what put you in this hospital bed in the first place." And that was the epiphany moment because a complete stranger, because we often never listen to the people closest to us, right? I mean, so it's this complete stranger says this to me. And for the rest of that day, I thought about it and I said, oh my gosh, I am trading my health for my career. And that is a really bad trade. And so after I got out of the hospital the next day, I resigned. And I started focusing on myself for the first time, really, that I could remember, focusing 100% on myself, because I realized if I didn't do this, I probably was not going to be around much longer. And so I experimented with a whole bunch of different stress relief tools and techniques. And I noticed that not only did my stress go down, my glucose numbers as a diabetic went down, my weight went down, and my energy level went way, way up. It was like I had experienced the fountain of youth. It was crazy. And here is the part that is unbelievable. If you look at a picture of me from 2008 and you look at me now, I actually look younger. 13 years ago, I look older than I look now. Now, I got a little bit more gray hair, but other than that, it's like, are you kidding me?
Wow.
And so that's what stress can do to you, negative stress, because as I mentioned to people, we're not looking at trying to eliminate all of the stress in our lives because there's actually good stress and bad stress. And what you want to do is focus on trying to get rid of the bad stress.
So, what did you do? What was the magic?
Well, the huge one of the game changers for me was, first of all, a realizing what is the bad stress.
Okay.
And what I found with the research that I did was that the bad stress really comes in two flavors: rumination, which is worrying
Mhm.
about something in the past, especially guilt. That's usually one of the biggest ones because we're guilty about something either that we did or didn't do.
And
And the
then
fact,
rumination also is kind of playing it over and over and over and
yes,
over. Mhm.
exactly. And what happens is that festers inside of you. And the problem is you can't do anything about the past, right? You can't have any effect on it. So trying to overcome with different techniques there on worrying about something I might have been guilty about. And then the other flavor is anxiety over something in the future. How many times do we worry about, oh my gosh, I have this important interview, or I have to have this difficult conversation with somebody, or whatever it happens to be. And you think about the worst thing that can happen. And if you continue to let that fester inside of you, what happens more often than not is you manifest the negative outcome.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And if you just instead, one of the things I love about being fearful about something in the future, because that's what it is, it's fear.
Right.
And what I always try and remind people is fear is actually a 4-letter acronym, and it stands for fictional evidence appearing real. Fictional
Mm,
evidence appearing real. See,
great.
we're doing it to ourselves. We're imagining all these horrible things. And instead of being in that stuck state of fear, what I like to ask people is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Now, think about that. What a different energy there is with that question, because it opens up the world of possibilities. And what's interesting is that works for any age. It really does. In fact, my youngest, he had just graduated from high school, and this was 3 years ago. And he went into one of these things like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. And it's like, well, of course, most of us don't at that age anyway, right? I mean, my daughter did. But she's type AAA. But my youngest, he absolutely had no idea. And the oldest one actually had no idea as well at this age. So it's like pretty perfectly normal. And I asked him this question. I said, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I told him, I said, don't tell me right now. I want you to think about that. And the next day he comes back to me, and first he says, Dad, that was a really interesting question, which was, for a teenager, that was actually a compliment. So I've hit a home run right
I
there.
know.
If you get a teenager to
There's a
compliment
win.
you,
Oh my gosh. Drop everything. You just won. Absolutely.
exactly. And
Absolutely.
he came back with 3 like off the wall ideas of what he would
Ah,
do. And the last one, or that he had the idea, he's still pursuing. So that was
yeah.
3 years ago. So it's just a matter of mindset in many cases, because um, most of our stress these days is mental. And if people realize that most of our stress is self-induced, we do it to ourselves, that is a game changer. And, like I think, my story about being in the ICU. Well, okay, so my boss texts me at 6 a.m., but I let my boss stress me because the way I responded to it.
Yeah.
So it's key. If we can just be more aware of that, it doesn't take a lot of time to really change direction.
Do you think that all obstacles that we have in our way, in our journey towards happiness or success, whatever success means to you, do you think that all those obstacles are self induced?
Oh, that's a good question. All is, that's an absolute.
Mm-hmm.
I would say definitely most.
Mm.
It really depends, though, because there could be certain things that are buried in your unconscious that if you say you're self-induced, but you don't realize that you're doing it, And so if you can overcome some of those, and there's ways to do that. There's a very powerful technique where you can actually go into your unconscious of your past and figure out what was that source event
Mm,
that caused you to have that stress or respond a certain way. And then there's a pattern that's created. And you
mm,
realize, why do I act this way every time? Or why does a certain person or a certain situation freak me out or something? Well, there's probably a source event. If you can get rid of those, then yes, those, then you're getting closer to the all. But I would be tempered to say that there could be something that just, if that that is an obstacle that potentially can't be overcome. Even if you have the right attitude. I mean, this is more physical usually than mental, though.
So I'm fascinated by this idea. Can you give us an example of maybe one of your clients or yourself who has gone through this exercise and actually identified that initial source or that initial nidus for that story of
Mhm.
limitation and how it built on itself over time?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting one. So the technique is called mental and emotional release, MER.
Mhm.
And it's a timeline activity that you do. And honestly, when it's been done on me, here's the crazy thing. I do not remember
Mm.
my source event. And the reason is because you want to get rid of it. You get rid of it off of your unconscious, because your unconscious doesn't want to carry it anymore.
Ah,
And the thing is that the person who helps you do this, they can tell you what the source event was, but the fact of the matter is, why?
yeah.
It's gone. You should just be happy. So I'll give you an example of one that was quite interesting.
So,
So
Pete, that means it was successful if
it
you've
was
forgotten it.
success.
Okay. So, if you
Absolutely.
can't recall it anymore, then job well done.
Yeah, and I can give you an example of how it actually had an effect on me. So
Hmm.
this is back before I had the diabetic ketoacidosis. But one of the people that I worked with, he was so arrogant and so pushy and such a bully. And every time I would hear his voice, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I could just,
Hmm.
it was one of those things. And I had no idea why he was affecting me so much.
Huh.
And after having MER done, I came into the office. I remember that Monday morning, and I heard his voice. And basically, all it was, oh, there's Doug, and it was like I didn't want to be friends with him, but he didn't have that emotional charge, that negative emotional charge that he was creating was gone. That was nuts for me. And as far as what the source problem was, I had one client who she was having a real difficult time with an eating disorder.
Mhm.
And so she wanted some help on that. And so we did MER. And the interesting thing is that what came out was that when she was a very small child, her mom, anytime there was something that seemed to be of stress to any of her or her siblings, mom fed with food,
Mhm.
and basically, and heavy food, macaroni and cheese. That was the comfort food of choice. And so what happened was that anytime she was stressed, that's what she would go right to, because that's what she knew. And she didn't know why, but that's what she craved. And she didn't know. And then basically, what we did was we found out that was the source problem, was that feeling like, oh, this is what mom gave me, but and I can't, I don't want to disappoint mom, etc. And then after that, we did another technique which ties a food that you have an issue with a food you don't like. And in your unconscious, you can actually align an unsavory food with a savory food, so that when you look at the savory food, you go, no, thank you. I don't want to touch that.
Oh,
It's for very specific types of food. Yeah. Yeah. So
interesting.
it's all in the unconscious. It's
Yeah.
really, really interesting. And it's just it's all about trying to figure out, okay, what's stopping you
Yeah.
from being the person that you want to be. And there's no magic pill. That's the problem that too many people think. I don't want to make any effort. I just want to take a pill. And the pharmaceutical industry has made a bunch of money over that thinking. But if you're willing to do some work, you can have some amazing outcomes.
So, how does this translate into business? How have you seen these transformations with your clients in terms of their business and their leadership?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when I have done workshops for teams, so the MER work is a one-on-one kind of thing. So I wouldn't do that as a team. But the activities that I run in the workshops, what happens is it opens up. First of all, it calms down the group, because if there's a level of tension there, especially if they're under the gun for a deadline. Maybe it's a sales deadline.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a particular project that the group is working on, whatever it happens to be. Or, there was one group that I worked with where the source of the tension was the boss. So,
Ah,
mhm.
that's
And
probably
so,
more common than you think.
oh, absolutely,
Mm.
because I wrote a book many years ago called Money Isn't All That Matters.
Mhm.
And the number one reason that people leave their jobs is a poor relationship with their manager. That may not, they may not admit that in their exit interviews. Often they'll say, oh, I got a better opportunity, or I got more money, or something like that. When somebody says something like that, usually that's not the real case. It's a poor relationship with the manager. And hands down, the research shows that, hands down.
Wow.
And it's because, think about it, if you don't have a good relationship with your manager, you're going to really be stressed. You're going to not like your work. You're not going to feel valued, what have you. It's just how it is. And when you have a manager who listens, when you have a manager who shows empathy and is willing to help, that makes all the difference in the world. It really does.
Fascinating. Fascinating. You know, one thing that I loved in researching a little bit about you is your podcast called Winning at Business and Life. You ask 6 questions in 7 minutes.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then when I was digging in a little bit more, I also learned about you that you have this and then maybe this is the MER you're talking about, but the trademark stress relief model that only takes a few minutes a day, which I want to ask you more about. But
Sure.
what I really want to focus on in this question is you keep talking about time. So recognizing people in business are busy. We have a lot on our plates. We hear all the time there's not enough time in the day. I wish there were more than 24 hours in a day.
Yep.
This idea of time can be very stressful in the business
Mhm.
world. Is
Mhm.
this a self imposed obstacle? Is time self imposed, or is that an actual obstacle in the business world and in our lives?
It is absolutely self-imposed.
Yeah.
And the reason it is, I can give you a couple different examples. One is when especially workaholic tendencies, we
Mm,
feel like we have to continue to work. We got to work, 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 work. Well, the reality is, whatever time we have available, if we allow it, work will encompass all that time.
mm,
And the other thing is, whatever we're working on, when we get distracted or we start working on less impactful things, it's going to be busy work.
mm.
It's going to be, and it starts taking up time from things that actually are more impactful. So that's another one. Another one that people don't realize is, especially everybody working from home during the pandemic, is that it's hard to stop working
Mm.
when you're at home because the computer's right there. And, oh, okay, I can just continue to work, 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 work. Well, what I find that's really, really helpful, because I do, if I wouldn't have had the workaholic tendency, I wouldn't have ended up in the emergency room. So one of the things that I found was, because I've worked from home for the last mostly for the last 20 years. And what I found was really helpful for me is an end of day anchor.
Mm.
And so what that is something that you do, that you get into a habit about, that will tell you that it's time to stop working. And what mine is my wife is a laboratory scientist at the local hospital. And so you can imagine she's one of the ones that runs the COVID, samples. And it's
Mm.
been the last year plus has been horror for
Mm.
her. But when I hear the garage door open when she comes home, 'cause she usually gets home late, after 8, 9 o'clock at night. When that garage door starts opening, that is my signal to shut down. So basically, if I'm on an email, I finish that email and I'm done. If I'm,
Mm.
whatever I'm working on, I'm putting it down. That's my mental reminder. The thing is, with time, you want to make sure you find something that will help you de-stress. And yes, we are, really looking for anything we can do to, find time. But the fact of the matter is, if we can do something like an end of day anchor, or just something that takes 1 to 2 minutes a day that we can do whenever we feel stressed, what'll happen is, if we make a habit of that and we do it on a daily basis, the compound benefits over time will be enormous. I've seen it. I've experienced it as well as seen it. But you got to get started.
Mm.
Too many people think I don't have any time. Like
Mm.
I was speaking with somebody in Shanghai, and all the person kept on telling me is, I don't have time. Everything has to be work and stuff. So I kept on asking questions, and like, I even had suggested, because this person really, really wants to travel for more than just work. And so I said, well, what if go to a particular location for business, and then you find one evening that you can go and do something interesting in that city, or spend an extra day at the end. I can't do that. I can't do that and stuff. And so the question is that, well, what would happen if, you lost your health tomorrow?
Mm. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know.
And that's the thing. We take our health for granted.
Mm.
And I did as well before this happened, because we always think, okay, I'll always have time for this tomorrow. But the fact of the matter is, if we burn ourselves out and we lose our health, the thing is, think about the last time that, let's say, Tarryn, the last time that you were really sick. Did you feel like doing anything other than lying in bed? Probably not.
No.
And the fact is that if all you have the energy to do is lie in bed, you're not going to be any good to your business. You're not going to be any good to your job. You're not going to be any good to the people that are important to you in your life. Whatever. You're not, it's too precious, and it doesn't take much time, but it should be a priority. Block it out in your calendar. If it's something that, every hour you get up and you stretch for a minute, or, at lunchtime you go for a quick walk or something. It doesn't take a lot. Well, you just got to make the effort. And, a couple minutes a day is going to be worth keeping your health in check.
So, what are the requirements of that activity? It sounds like you have to stop what you're doing. You have to move your body.
Mhm.
You have to tell me some more of the rules of that activity.
Sure. It doesn't even have to be move the body. I mean, technically, if I'll give you, let me walk you through one of my favorites.
Sure.
Okay. Takes 1 minute. So I'd like you to go ahead and close your eyes.
Okay.
Take a nice deep breath in. And I want you to go in your mind to a place you like to relax. Maybe it's the beach. Maybe it's a park. Maybe it's a lake. Maybe it's your backyard. Maybe it's the spa. Wherever it is, go there now in your mind and take in all of your senses. What do you feel? Do you feel the sun on your face? Maybe the sand or the grass under your feet? What do you smell? Do you smell the fresh air? Maybe the lotion from the spa? And what do you hear? Do you hear the wind blowing through the trees? Maybe the water splashing on shore? And what do you see? Do you see the blue sky? Maybe the green of the trees or the grass? Whatever it is, take it all in and take another deep breath and open your eyes. How did that feel?
Yeah, fantastic.
Isn't it? And it took less than 1 minute and we didn't move our body. It's basically something that you can do at any point. If you feel like the stress is starting to kind of creep up, you go to your happy place for 1 minute. And, it doesn't take much effort to do that. But the key is, more than anything else, is all distractions should be off. So whenever you do any of these activities, absolutely turn off your phone, turn off your email, turn off your Slack notifications, whatever it happens to be. And the reason being is because, let's say, even in that 1 minute, had we been doing that and all of a sudden you ping, you get a text and
Yeah.
stuff. That's the problem. We've been programmed now to just go, oh, I got to respond to this text more so than taking care of ourselves. Or in many cases, in most cases, what I see, the person who you're having a conversation with, you go, the text becomes the priority because we go and we look at it. And, it's interesting because now that restaurants have opened back up, at least for a short term, I'm imagining that people will have more of an appreciation for restaurant dining. How about turning your phones off while you're having your meals so that you can be present with the other person or other people that you're having the meal with? The amazing thing is that when the phone is not there as a distraction, being present with the other person, you have some fantastic
Yeah,
conversations. It
absolutely.
really is. And so how many times do you remember sitting in a restaurant, probably mostly prior to COVID, but even now I've seen it where you see two people sitting at the table and they're both on their phones. And I think to myself, I think, why did you bother coming out to
Yeah.
dinner? Why didn't you just get takeout, right?
Well, you know what's so interesting? You're making me realize as that garage door was your anchor to end the day, so is the pinging and the vibration of our phone the anchor to
Yes.
stress. So
Yes.
immediately it brings you right back to that place of stress. Even though you haven't realized it, it's been ingrained in you in
Oh,
terms of a
absolutely.
stress anchor. And even at a young age, you mentioned your children. I know in my three kids, I see it already too. My youngest doesn't even have a phone, but when that thing goes off, she runs and gets the phone to give to me. The
Mhm.
urgency is already established. She already knows that this has a high importance and needs immediate attention, which is fascinating that that's already created that negative association with stress and anxiety and overwhelm.
It does. And it's interesting that you bring that up because one of my favorite suggestions is to detox from technology. And when my kids were small, what we used to do is go at least once a year on a camping trip. And kids, they went, yeah, they don't want to, they'd rather stay home. Um, I wanted to do it. And the reason being is because, at least back then, most of the campsites did not have Wi-Fi and did not have cell signal. And so what would happen is the two of them and also myself would go through this day of detox. And I can only speak really for myself here, but I had my business. I was teaching classes, online classes, and I had other things that I knew that I needed to be checking on. And so I'd have this detox of, oh my gosh, if something's going to go wrong, blah, blah, blah. And then the next morning I'd realize, oh, the world didn't stop.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? The world didn't stop. And the thing that is amazing is that when you detox and you take some time, you don't have to do it for 24 hours like a camping trip, or, it can just be for an hour or two.
A meal.
And
you were
a
saying
meal.
a meal.
Exactly, a meal. Because here's the fact of the matter. When we do not detox from technology, so when we are checking our messages constantly in the evening, on the weekends, on our vacation, what happens is we haven't stopped working. And when we haven't stopped working, we don't give our mind or our body the opportunity to recharge. So you're still stressing yourself out, as you mentioned earlier. And that's the thing is that there's only so much that your body can put up with, because what happens is, since most of our stress is mental, it's dumping. Every time we're stressed, we're dumping cortisol, adrenaline into our bodies unnecessarily. And at some point, for all of us, whatever the weakest link in our body is going to break down. For me, it was the pancreas. But you have to realize that if you just separate yourself from that for an hour for the meal, or an afternoon on a Saturday, to be present with your kids or be present with your significant other, that will have a huge impact on your overall stress level.
Very cool. And I think, even to speak to the business leaders out there and the leaders of their teams, it gives you more clarity to be able to make good, positive, and impactful
Yes.
decisions, as opposed to reactive decisions or decisions made out of a place of fear. Because if you're living in that cortisol swamped world, it's very hard to make decisions that are not reactive.
Absolutely.
And it's very powerful to be able to take that moment, even as you mentioned, in a busy day at work. And just that 1 minute exercise, I think, could be so powerful as a leader of your team.
It could. And the other thing that I would mention for leaders is that realize that the way you operate, how your expectation is of how often your people are working, that is going to add stress to them if they feel like they need to work as hard as you do.
Oh,
And
interesting. You mean the modeling that you show?
Exactly. Because what happens is, so I had a boss, probably one of the best bosses I ever had. And for at least a couple of years, this was going on, and when neither one of us realized what we were doing to each other, basically. But he would go to bed early and get up very early. And he would send messages, let's say on a Sunday night, with the intent that his people would read it Monday morning. Well, because I stayed up later than he did, I would get that message and I'd think, okay, I'm going to start pondering it. And guess what? Now all of a sudden I'm in work mode.
Yep.
And I felt like I needed to respond to it because he was working all these hours. I needed to work all these hours. And it wasn't until a couple of years later where we had this conversation, and he told me, he says, I don't need you to respond on Sunday night or Monday night or in the evenings and stuff. I just want, he just wanted to get it off of his plate. That's all he wanted. That gave him stress relief, was getting it off his plate. And knowing that his expectation was that I didn't need to respond right away was a big deal. Now, it was interesting because I saw Amazon's been getting a lot of bad press lately because of the working conditions. But there was an article that I saw a couple of weeks ago about a VP in, I forget what area that she works in, but she showed her signature that she has on her emails. And I have to paraphrase because I don't remember it identically. But what she said is that I don't expect you to respond to this message immediately. Please respond when convenient, because your family, your personal life is more important.
Ooh.
And that gets her people, whoever she's sending that to, or, maybe a peer, that person doesn't have to respond right away. It's not expected of that. It's because, and the whole purpose is because they want, she was asking for a coherent, fresh answer, not, oh, let me send back a really quick, stressed answer. So those are the things we have to realize, that the modeling that we have with our people, they'll either feel like I can't keep up, or they will, but they're going to burn themselves out. And you don't want that. Any manager knows that the hardest thing to do is have to replace a good worker, because that is, somebody has to work for, take on their work while you're interviewing somebody new, and then you got to do the training. It's literally a 6-month process, and whatever lost productivity that you have with that. And if that person has any kind of interactions with customers, then there's that rapport has been lost with the customer, et cetera. It's so much easier to take care of the good people that you have on board. And it doesn't take a huge amount by a leader to make that difference.
One of the things that came up as you were speaking, an example of that is working through lunch. As an owner, especially as a business owner, if this is your baby, this is something you've grown, you pour 110% into your business, but that modeling for your team is so dangerous as well, because what you're showing them is, you have to work through lunch. You have to sacrifice any of that free, quiet time to just recover and repair and prepare for the afternoon. And so that's another great example of how that could be taken the wrong way as well from your team members, in terms of just setting them up for burnout.
Yeah, it is. And another thing that we don't realize is that multitasking doesn't work very well.
No.
Because how many times do you remember sitting in a conference room with your computer and your phone, and and it's like you're sitting there and you're trying to listen to the person, whoever's presenting or something like that, or whoever's talking in the room, and so, but you're only half listening or quarter listening because you're distracted with all these things. Same thing with, you're too busy, you're eating lunch at your desk and you've got your computer out, blah, 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 blah. Well, the problem that people don't realize is that our minds can only take on so much at any one time.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting because I saw this research done where it said that if you have one project that you're working on, you're putting 100% focus on there, you got 100% mind share. But let's say that you've got 5 active projects that you're working on, or 5 active fire, let's call them fire alarms, maybe not projects, but fire alarms, right? Which is such a reality. Well, what happens is you would think, okay, well, average math would mean that that should mean 20% of my mind share should be on each project. No, it doesn't work that way. And the reason it doesn't work that way is because when we transition from one fire alarm or one project to the next, there is the down, coming down from one project and the ramping up to the other project. So like thinking like, okay, I'm transitioning now. Where was I at this project? So if you think about it, as we do that with 5 projects, the math turns out to be that 80% of our mind share is spent in that transitionary period, trying to remember where was I, and
Yeah.
oh, what do I have to do to remember what I'm doing on this current project, etc., which leaves only 20% of mind share for the 5 projects. So guess what? Instead of 20% in standard math, it's actually only 4% of our
Yeah.
mind share on a daily basis can be spent on each project when we're trying to multitask with 5.
You know,
So
it's so
it's crazy.
fascinating, isn't it interesting? And I'm so glad you brought it up because I think many people, especially high achievers, think that their multitasking is a superpower.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
very common, and I'm sure with men, but especially with women, we tout ourselves as being so much better at multitasking than men are. And it is. It's something that many people think is a very big strength of theirs, but you're right, it's extremely inefficient.
Mm-hmm. It is. And what happens is that, once again, modeling. So whether it's our superiors, our peers, whatever,
Mm.
when we see them going, oh, they're sitting on their computer and they're doing this and they're doing that, it's
Mm.
like, do I look like I'm a slacker because I'm not doing that? So there's a lot of peer pressure involved with that. But it's so important to, if you can prioritize what's the most important thing, and just focus on that. Yeah, emergencies happen, things like that, but the more you can focus as much attention on whatever you're working on that's important and impactful, the less stress you're going to be, the
Mm.
more efficient you're going to be, and you'll get all those things done. Don't just keep on trying to juggle them.
Mm.
It's too distracting and exhausting.
Mm.
It
Oh,
really is.
great advice. Such cool. Oh, you are such a wealth of information about stress. Thank you so much. I feel like we could talk forever. I love all the tips that you have. And I really love that you're bringing it to normalize in the business world, because a lot of these conversations we steer away from. We're so focused on productivity, so focused on success and achievement and numbers. So we really miss the time to be able to have this kind of conversation and see the deeper impact of and importance of these practices. So thank you. Thank you.
Been my pleasure. Yeah, you can see that I'm very passionate about it. I mean, when you have a near death experience, and
Yeah.
and I've actually seen others who let the stress really affect them to the point where they're no longer around.
That's
And it's just, it is. And the fact of the matter is that if we prioritize, one of the things that I always highly recommend to anyone is to make sure that you understand your personal values, what's most important to you. Because if you, whenever we have a major decision, like, let's say, should I be, you know, uh, should I go after this for my career? Or maybe for our business, should we buy this other business or buy this building, or, make this significant investment, or hire this important employee, or something like that? If you know what your top 5 personal values are, and you run that decision by your top 5 values and make sure that they're in alignment, then it's going to be good. If you don't, guess what? You're going to add unnecessary stress to your life because you're not being true to yourself. And so it's sort of like these mind hacks that you can do. And it makes all the difference in the world. It really, really does. And, again, to remember that we're not trying to get rid of all of our stress, because the good stress, it's called eustress, eustress. That's the stuff that helps us get things done. And
Mm.
especially if we're working on stuff that we're passionate about,
Mm.
that we're happy about, we absolutely need good stress. So, it's just get rid of that rumination that we talked about, and the anxiety, and everything else is going to be pie in the sky.
So you mentioned happiness. What is the definition? What is your definition of happiness?
For me, it's actually making a positive difference in the world. That really is my definition of happiness. So, whenever I see the light go on in somebody's mind, that aha moment kind of thing, it's like, okay, I had an impact. And
That's
so
awesome.
to me, that's really happiness. And other than that, it's, having quality time with the people that are important to me in my life and being out in nature whenever I can. That's nature. That's happiness.
Nature. Yeah. So, what is your superpower, Professor Pete?
My superpower? Oh, that's a good question. I would say, okay, well, this is a crazy one.
Yeah.
I have an encyclopedia of jokes inside of my brain. And what happens is my stepdad was, I don't know if you ever heard of vaudeville,
Yes.
but he was a child vaudeville entertainer.
Wow.
And so over the years when I was growing up, he would tell me all these different jokes. And so now I'm able to, like an encyclopedia, depending on the conversation that I'm having with somebody, a keyword will bring up a joke. And literally, I've pulled up jokes and said them exactly the way that they're supposed to be delivered from jokes I heard 50 years ago. So it's the superpower that I have. And would I go up on stage and do this? No, absolutely not. But it is something that in general conversations and stuff I can do. And people always say, "Oh my God, how do you remember those?" So it's somehow I have a superpower inside my brain to be able to remember them.
Oh, that's fascinating. I think you have to share one with us.
Okay. Let me ask you. So I had a few coming up during our conversation that, just because of the words and stuff, but
Any of them about happiness?
about not jokes about happiness, because it's usually ironic kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's one. Do you know what the difference between a Harley Davidson motorcycle and a Hoover vacuum cleaner is?
Oh, I have no idea.
The position of the dirt bag.
Oh my gosh. Gotcha. Okay. I love it. Now I can see
I,
exactly what you're talking about.
so usually what happens is that as we're having a conversation and I think about something and I'll just say, "Oh, did you hear about this?" or
Yeah.
something, and that joke I actually told one time when I was ready to get on the ferry nearby me going to Victoria, Canada, and there was a whole bunch of bikers
Uh-huh.
there. And I asked that question to them. My wife was terrified. She thought that they were going to beat the crap out of me and
Yeah.
stuff, and they thought that was hilarious.
Hilarious. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. And, I'd love to, on that note, very antithetical to what we were just saying. But on that note, I'd love to know if all of this incredible work that you've done and your really fabulous podcast, and we didn't even talk about the books that you've been writing. You've got some great books that you've already authored. Money Isn't All That Matters is one of the ones that you mentioned. But please, to my audience members who are listening and watching, check him out, and we'll put all of your contact information in the show notes. For those audience members who are listening, how can they find you if they'd like to learn more about you?
Oh, sure. The easiest way to do it is just to go to my website, which is petealexander.com. It has the stress relief book, Lighten Your Day there. It has the podcast there. It has my blog that has a whole bunch of different ideas, including,
Cool.
if the listeners want to actually elicit their personal values, there's an activity to do that,
Ooh, I
and it
love
doesn't take a
that.
lot of time. Oh yeah, oh yeah. So all of these different ideas that we were talking about, there's a
Mm,
blog post on it. So
cool.
and then if they want to reach out to me, I'm happy to engage with them. I'm active on LinkedIn, so they can look me up on LinkedIn at Professor Pete Alexander as well. So got easy to find me.
Awesome. So the question now begs, if all of this phenomenal information that you do have out on your website and on LinkedIn and your books and your podcast were to disappear, Pete,
Mhm.
what is one piece of advice that you could give to us in concerning stress relief?
Yeah, that I would sum it up in one sentence, which is don't trade your health for your career
Mm,
because that's a very bad trade.
yeah, I like
It
it.
really is.
Yeah.
It's the truth. It really is because once you don't have your health, it's ridiculous what negative effects that can have. And it's interesting now because in the evening before my wife and I go to sleep, we have a gratitude exercise,
Mm,
and we ask each other, "What are we grateful for from this day?" And my very first thing that I always say in that activity is, "I'm
mm,
grateful for my health
mm,
because all else is secondary."
mm,
And
mm.
then I recap everything else. But that is always what I say, and it's so true. Don't take your health for granted.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard that here. Don't trade your health for your career. And I know that that's going to land with someone in a very impactful way. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and thank you so much for your listeners' time.
Wonderful. And to all of you, thank you for joining us for this episode. And as always, today is going to be a great day. Bye bye.